All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Don Young. I'm the base commander for the Williamsport base of the United States Submarine Veterans Incorporated. And first, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out this afternoon to help us honor John Peterman and his service, both our country and to his community and county. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Jeannie Twigg. She'll be singing the national anthem for us. And if you could all please, at this time, just stand while Jeannie sings the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
All right, thanks, Jeannie. As always, does a wonderful job. We'll do the invocation. All right, Frank Gillis, our vice commander, is going to do the invocation.
Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, bless all submariners for their service to this great country, its ideals, and its quest for freedom of mankind throughout the world. Bless those who have gone before us and paid the ultimate price for freedom with their lives. Hold them in the palms of your hands and allow them to rest beneath the waves of your oceans. Amen.
One of the traditions that John's generation of submariners started was the tolling of the boats, and to honor the memory of those submariners who lost their lives in the line of duty. This custom consists of the names of each submarine lost, along with the fate of its crew, being read aloud as the ship's bell is tolled for each in turn. At the beginning of each of our meetings, we conduct a tolling of the boats for that month. Our past base commander, Bill Reesner, will read the boats lost for the month of September.
Used to be able to read this without glasses, but time has a way of being unkind. Tolling for the boats of September. USS S5, SS110, lost on September 1, 1920, when a practice dive went wrong and she sank bow first, with her stern showing above the water. In a dramatic adventure, her exhausted crew was rescued during the next few days. Salvage attempts were unsuccessful, and S5 settled to the bottom and was abandoned. USS Grayling, SS209, lost on September 9, 1943, with a loss of 76 men near the Tabla Strait. Grayling was on her 8th war patrol and sank 2 ships before being lost. USS Pompano, SS181. Pompano was sunk between 17 September and October 5th with a loss of 77 men. While on her 7th war patrol, possibly lost on September 17, 1943, Japanese records show that a submarine was sunk in her patrol area on 17 September by air and depth charge attack off the Aomori Prefecture near Shirayazaki. Before being lost, she sank 2 enemy cargo ships. The exact cause of her loss remains unknown, but she probably was sunk by an air-sea attack from above or fell victim to a mine on or after 9/25/1943. This boat's last recorded ship sunk was the Takao Maru on September 25th, so she probably hit a mine on or after that date, but before October 5th, when she was scheduled back at Midway. USS S-51, SS-162, lost on September 25th, 1925, with a loss of 33 men when it was sunk after a collision with the SS City of Rome off Block Island. USS Cisco, SS-290, lost on September 28, 1943, on her first war patrol with a loss of 76 men in the Sulu Sea west of Mindanao.
And as I said, that was something that John's generation of submariners from World War II had started to remember those lost. At this time, on behalf of the Peterman family and Williamsport Base USSVI, I'd like to thank our distinguished guests, Representative Tina Pickett, who introduced the legislation for naming this highway after John, and Charlie Hall, District Administrator for Garth Everett. Garth had another commitment and wasn't able to make it. And unfortunately, nobody from Senator Yaw's office was able to attend today because of other commitments. And we also have County Commissioners, Wiley Norton, the chairman, and Donna Ionun, and Brian Hoffman. And we also have the Bob Montgomery, the Sullivan County Sheriff, who's in attendance. And did I miss anybody? Okay.
Our treasurer. Our treasurer.
The county treasurer? Okay. Hey. Okay, and I'd also like to thank the Sonestown American Legion Post for the use of their post here today. They provided us a nice dry place out of the rain. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to just thank our veterans and anybody that's here that's on active duty, to thank them for their service and sacrifices to our country. At this time, I'd like to introduce Representative Tina Pickett so she can have the welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much. It is most assuredly humbling and a great honor for me to be here today for such a great man, and to be in the presence of his family members and all of the service that his family members have given to this country, are continuing to give to this country, and certainly to officially honor and thank him for the great service he gave to our country. Not only what he gave to our country, but came back home and continued to give great service within this county and surrounding areas in so many distinctive ways. When I first was approached about possibly naming the highway for him, and I read all of his information about his life, I was wowed. I was really amazed that this was all about one man and the things that he had done. It was just exciting to read it, and I knew right off that it was going to be a distinct pleasure for everybody in this region and for the entire state of Pennsylvania to be able to put this honor forth for Commander Peterson. It's just amazing the things that he accomplished and the things that he did, and I'm sure I didn't have the chance to talk to him about all of those things, but I have a feeling he's the kind of guy who did what he thought was the right thing to do and never really made a big thing about it for himself. So it's kind of fun to be able to be here today and to be able to honor him in a way that's going to stay here for a long, long time, hopefully forever. And you might think a little bit about what is the process of all of that. So I was approached with the information regarding him by Bill Groover, and I immediately set to work to make this happen. And the process is such that once we know the things that we learned about Mr. Peterson, we turn that into a proposal for a bill. It actually has to become a bill to create a naming of a highway, and we did that. and had co-sponsors for that bill, and everything has to take a little bit of time to be driven through and happen, even though it's something that is completely worthy and everybody is in favor of. It still takes time. You've probably heard about that kind of thing with the legislative bodies. And so we worked it way through its path and got it done, and it was out of committee. Well, it was a transportation committee, and everybody has to verify the exact highway spots where things are going to go and that sort of thing, making it official. And it goes through the committee in the House, went through the Transportation Committee, voted out of that committee, came to the full House floor for a vote, and then went to the Senate and went through an identical process of going through a committee, being voted by the full Senate, and eventually on its way to the governor to be signed. So that is the way it happens and the way we finally come to this moment. And all of the ways through that process, it gave people a chance, people who were involved in making that happen, other legislators and other committee members and staff that were involved with it. It gave people a chance to know about Mr. Peterson and to read about the things that he had done. And it was a nice moment of history for people who were able to do that. So I want to tell you that it's just a real pleasure and a real honor for me to be here today to finally come together with his family, with the other community members that knew him and knew what he did for everybody that he came encounter with. And I am just so pleased to go through this program and to be able to hear more about him and to hear some of the things that his family members distinctly may say about him today, and give us a little more insight into this Lieutenant Commander Peterman. So thank you so much for allowing me to be part of the service, and I await the further things that are going to come to us today in this great honor. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tina. Charlie, do you have some remarks?
Try to get up without talking, including myself. Thanks, Don. Good afternoon. It really is an honor to be here today on behalf of Representative Everett. As was mentioned, he had another commitment today and was unable to attend with us. I would echo what Representative Pickett said about getting to read and learn more about Lieutenant Commander Peterman. Very interesting information, great education, to the point where I think I found a new definition of love and service to country and fellow man, and that definition would obviously be like Lieutenant Commander Peterman, just in reading the information. Representative Pickett also mentioned to you about the ups and downs and valleys and peaks of legislation naming roads. This one did not meet. This one also had its own little issues and problems along the way, and we still have a few minor little issues and problems that we need to take care of, because I'd like to publicly thank the submarine veterans and also Representative Pickett, because in the process of this taking place, our office was contacted by the family of someone in Lycoming County relative to the area that used to be known as the Bryantown Curves outside of Pitcher Rocks, who spent a lot of time, effort, and energy in making that area a little bit safer for the traveling public, wondering if a section of Route 220 could be named in his honor. So what we were able to do was actually work out a compromise, and we actually determined that we could name the beginning of that road section to the borough line of Pitcher Rocks after that gentleman. His name happens to be Thomas Paternostro, former superintendent of the East Lycoming School Districts. And then move the Peterman designation to a little bit different location, but have it still maintain its terminus. We thought everything was fine. But if you really are a geek and want to go back and look at actual legislation, you'll look at Act 90, which designated the Peterman Highway. You'll see that it still has its original designation from where it was supposed to start to where it's supposed to end. Then immediately underneath that, it names a section of roadway for Thomas Paternostro. The problem with that section of roadway is it, quite frankly, just simply does not exist. So we actually have a piece of legislation right now that Representative Pickett is a co-sponsor of, to go in and take care of that little snigfa. Since And since no one from the senator's office is here, I'll go ahead and let you know, this really got screwed up in the Senate, but as Representative Pickett could attest, that's happened on occasion. But truly it is an honor and a pleasure to be here for Representative Everett for the dedication of a highway named in honor of, Lieutenant Commander Peterman. I am also waiting to hear a little bit more from folks that know him, family members, and things along those lines. But in closing, I would also just once again like to thank the submarine veterans who had the foresight to schedule an event inside for those of us particularly who have not spent a lot of our lifetime underwater. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Bill Reasoner. He's our founding base commander for the Williamsport base. And he's going to explain a little bit about Williamsport base.
Got to get the glasses out again because I want to read this.
Put your stuff down there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's good. I thought of many things to say today about the Williamsport base. Oh, and by the way, Charlie, Tina, naming that section of road for Tom Patternostro is a good idea, a really good idea. As I said, I've thought of many things to say about the Williamsport base USS VI today, but enough about us. We're here today to honor one of us. And he was one of us. Lieutenant Commander John James Peterman, to me, was, and I'm sure to many others, the reason we chose the all-volunteer submarine service. And in doing so, we became a submariner, earning our coveted dolphins. While we did not know him personally at the time of his service or ours, he really became the patriarch of our base. And he became my friend. Today, in this celebration, the members of Williamsport Base USS VI have waited for since the passing of Lieutenant Commander John James Peterman and his entering his eternal patrol. One of the many accolades John received in his lifetime, I think probably the one most cherished by him, would have been when he was referred to as a friend. He found about 20 friends in our base. And he found a lot of fun with a bunch of young guys. At least younger than he was. I know that after 55 years, over 55 years since I qualified on a submarine, I sat in the last meeting that John attended with us. He brought a gyro from a Mark 14 torpedo. And he gave us an in-depth explanation of that gyro. And I found myself, because he sat right alongside of me, and I know that Dan couldn't hear him, nor could most anyone else. And with my bad hearing, I somehow or another picked up about 95% of what he said. And I found myself remembering a lot of information about a Mark 14 torpedo, and I still can't get it out of my head. I have a fondness for the right quote from time to time, and I think I found one that's really fitting for today. The quote is from one of my favorite American authors, James A. Michener. And it goes like this, and I quote, "I dragged my gear down to the shore and saw the submariners, the way they stood aloof and silent, watching their pig boats with loving eyes. They are alone in the Navy, in the entire fleet, excuse me, they stand apart. And that, ladies and gentlemen, speaks volumes about John Peterman. On behalf of Base Commander Don Young and the membership of the Williamsport Base USFVI, I want to thank you for being part of this very special day for me and for all the other members of Williamsport Base. Thank you very much.
At this time, I'd like to call Jay Myers, the Legion Post Commander, here up for remarks about John.
When I think of John Peterman, I think of really one word comes to mind, and that's commitment. Commitment to the Legion, commitment to the community, commitment to the submarine force and the defense of our country. I think that, you know, all the things that he did in his lifetime will always show that commitment to the things he held dear. I want to reflect back just a little bit on another veteran that was my mother's second husband, who grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard of it, Picture Rocks. But he did the exact opposite of what John did during World War II. He flew C-47 cargo planes, 98 missions over the hump from India into China during World War II. But when I think of both of these gentlemen, I think of one thing, and that's something that Tom Brokaw said. You know, they were the greatest generation. Thank you.
If you hear snoring, it's just our mascot, Maisie, over there. So, at this time, I'd like to talk a little bit about John's activities in our organization. John was an active member of our base, and he was one of our World War II submarine veterans. And as such, he always provided some good sea stories at our monthly meetings. And like Bill had said, he brought that Mark 14 gyro and schooled us on that, as well as some other things that he'd bring to meetings. John was a huge part of our Caps for Kids program. That's an outreach where we visit pediatric patients over at Geisinger Children's Hospital, and we give the kids honorary submarine or embroidered ball caps, certificates, visit with them. John would wear his uniform, and he'd be just like a living history lesson for the kids. Some of the kids that were old enough that started with history and stuff, that they really liked that chance to meet a World War II veteran. John loved doing it. He gets the smile on his face. Even the first visit that we made over there on that Veterans Day, when we made our visit, WNEP had interviewed John, and you could just see the smile on his face. He just loved what he was doing. And on one of those Veterans Day visits, I think it might have even been our first visit, we were in the lobby there at the Children's Hospital getting ready, and a woman come over and she said that her father-in-law was a World War II Army veteran, served in the Pacific, and he was up in the ICU. And she had said that he always made it to the Veterans Day ceremonies, and he couldn't that year because of being in the hospital, and she wondered if we could go up and visit him. So we were like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And John, he was all for that. So the hospital was gracious and arranged, after our visit was done with the pediatric patients, for us to go up to ICU and visit them. So when we got up there, John started into the room, and the nurse started backing John out, and we were worried maybe something was wrong. And here what it was the gentleman wanted to be stood up. He wanted to meet John on his feet. And this guy was probably, 6'7", Bill? He was very tall. Well, it turns out he was on 16 or 18 different islands during the Pacific campaign with the Army. John and him talked a little bit where they were in the Pacific and different things. And, when he got stood up there and John came into the room, he saluted John. And it was a special moment for those of us that were with him to see those two be able to come together like that. And John was just the kind of guy, tell me when and where and I'll be there. And it was pretty much how he was. The other part I'd like to mention, he often, like I said, told us these stories. Some of the stuff I don't know whether he talked about his family or friends or not, but he talked to us about a lot of stuff. One of the things he told us about was on one of their war patrols, which John had done 9 war patrols on the Flying Fish, and the Flying Fish had, 12 war patrols the Flying Fish had made total and had 12 battle stars. The second war patrol on the Flying Fish, he was telling us about a Japanese battleship that they had attacked, and they got beat up pretty bad from the counterattack for it. So I found some information on it, and we're just going to read about that attack with the events. And that second war patrol was from August to September of 1942. And on 15 August 1942, she sailed on her second war patrol, bound for a station north of Truk. On 28 August, only 3 days after arriving on station, Flying Fish sighted the mass of a Japanese battleship, now known to be Yamato, guarded by 2 destroyers and air cover. She launched 4 torpedoes at this prime target. 2 hits were detected by sonar. Immediately, the counterattack began, and as Flying Fish prepared to launch torpedoes at one of the destroyers, rapidly closing to starboard, her commanding officer was blinded by a geyser of water thrown up by a bomb. Flying Fish went deep for cover. A barrage of 36 depth charges followed. When Flying Fish daringly came up to periscope depth 2 hours later, she found the 2 destroyers still searching, aided by 2 harbor submarine chasers and 5 aircraft. A great cloud of black smoke hung over the scene, persisting through the remaining hours of daylight. As Flying Fish up periscope again a little later, a float plane dropped bombs directly astern, and the alert destroyers closed in. A salvo of torpedoes at one of the destroyers missed, and Flying Fish went deep again to endure another depth charging. Surfacing after dark, she once more attracted the enemy through excessive smoke from one of her engines, and again she was forced down by depth charges. Early in the morning of 29 August, she at last cleared the area and to surface and charge her batteries. Unshaken by this long day of attack, Flying Fish closed on Truk once more on 2 September 1942 and attacked a 400-ton patrol vessel, only to see the torpedoes fail to explode upon hitting the target, which was a huge problem in the beginning of the war for the detonators on the torpedoes. The patrol ship ran down the torpedo tracks and began a depth charge attack, the second salvo of which damaged the Flying Fish considerably. A second patrol ship came out to join the search. Flying Fish successfully evaded both opponents and cleared the area. Determinedly, she returned to the scene late the next night, and finding a single patrol vessel, sank her with 2 torpedoes just after midnight early on 4 September. 2 hours later, a second patrol craft came out, and as Flying Fish launched a stern shot, the Japanese ship opened fire, then swerved to avoid the torpedoes. Flying Fish died for safety, enduring 7 depth charge runs by the patrol vessel. 2 destroyers joined the patrol craft, and all 3 kept the submarine under attack for 5 hours. At last able to get clear, Flying Fish, due to her considerable damage, sailed for Pearl Harbor, where she arrived on 15 September. And at this time, I'd like to call up Dan, John's brother. Thank you, everybody.
I'm getting old, but not that old. I have lots of stories I could talk to about John. I was 10 years old when John joined the Navy in 1940, right after high school. And I really didn't get to know John as an individual till we were shipmates on the USS Dace. And there isn't supposed to be two people from one family on one ship in the Navy anymore after the Sullivan brothers. But when I got out of submarine school, before I got out of submarine school, John wrote to one of his ex-commanders during World War II and requested that I be assigned to his submarine USS Dace in Key West, and I was. And so then we was shipmates for about 10 months till he went to officers training school. But I really got to know John as a shipmate and a brother at that time. And John was well respected by the officers on the USS Dace. He was one of the more senior enlisted men on the submarine. And most of the officers at that time were people that were maybe, if they was in World War II, they were ensigns or lieutenants. And so here you had a few people on the USS Dace who had went through World War II. And it was quite a struggle. I think John probably talked to me a lot about World War II, maybe more than other people, and what it was and what it was like to be depth charged. I mean, if you're depth charged, and I never was, thank God. But if you was being depth charged, John says, like, this whole room would shake. Your floor would shake and so forth. And it was a terrifying moment. And it's also, I think, a time for a submariner. I think it's one thing to be shot and dead on a battlefield, but on a submarine, how do you die? It's never talked about on a submarine, but I guess you either freeze to death or you suffocate. And but I had a good time with John in the submarine. And after you get on the submarine, you have 6 months to what they call qualify. You learn a few things in submarine school for a couple of months, but then after you get on the submarine, you have 6 months that you have to go through every room and be able to do everything in that room that's required of the person that's in charge of that room. At that time, John was in charge of the forward torpedo room. And everybody used to kid me, said, boy, you'll have it easy because your brother is on board here with you. Of course, that's not the truth. John made darn sure that I got to know everything that I should know, and I think I could have fired a torpedo with my eyes shut. And but John was quite an individual. He was, and a couple of things I can remember that happened during World War II. I think during World War II, I think I seen John probably about 3 times. One of the things that I used to marvel at was at about, I don't know, the summer of, like, let's say 1943, my dad and mother got a money order in the mail for $1,800 from John. And if people who of my age know that $1,800 during World War II or 43 was a heck of a lot of money. And so my parents, well, and I never heard them talk about it, but I'm wondering, I'm sure that they had to wonder, where does $1,800 come from? And so I found out afterwards where the money came from after we was both out of the Navy. When a submariner goes to sea during World War II, they go to sea broke, because there's the Navy pays you every 2 weeks in cash. But on the submarine, there's nothing to buy. And so John said before they went to sea, they spent all their money. They'd either buy cigarettes or candy, because he says you could trade cigarettes and candy on the submarine. And you kept, if there's a card game going on, you kept the scores on the card games. And when you come back to Pearl or Guam or Australia, wherever, you settled up with your other submariners. And that was kind of like the life it was. And I think John had a wonderful career. He was much smarter than I was by far. And one thing that most people don't know, about 1942, John was selected to be what they called a V-12 program. And a V-12 program was, I think, 9 months long or 6 months long at a college, and then you would be commissioned as an officer. And John took a test, passed the test, and I guess probably interviewed by the captain, and somebody decided that he should go to college, and he picked Villanova. Well, he was down at Villanova about 3 months, and I guess the desire to be a shipmate again and help in the war was more desirable to him than finish his degree and be an officer in the Navy. He did become an officer, but he gave up college and the chance to be a commissioned officer and went back to the same submarine, USS Flying Fish. And I think before you leave, if you read this plaque in front, that'll show you all the duty stations he was on. And John often mentioned, I'll mention this, I don't know, right before, say, later part of 44, there was 9 submarines went into the Sea of Japan. For people who are not history buffs, the Sea of Japan is between China and Japan, and it had a gate onto it. The Japanese had erected a gate to get in and out of there, and so somehow, I guess through intelligence, they found out when the gate would be open. So they went in the gate, and they was up in the Sea of Japan. There was 9 submarines up there. Only 7 came out. Unfortunately, 2 of them did not come out. John often mentioned to me, not often, but a few times in his life, about when they came out of the gate, out of the Sea of Japan into the Pacific Ocean, that a submarine is kind of shaped like a cigar. And then they was coming out of there, and he said that you could hear the scraping of a cable, there's, I assume, attached to a depth charge or a bomb or something, at the beginning of the submarine, and he says you could hear that all the way through there, that scraping, and of course the submarine, the water amplified it, and he says you just sitting there on pins and needles until such time as they passed it and so on and so forth. They got out and so on and so forth. And I'm awful proud to have John as a brother, and I've got to know him much better as an adult than I did as children. And thank everybody for coming to honor my brother. It was a great honor to have him as a brother, and I thank you all for coming. And he was. I think one of the other things about the Legion, I think John held every job in the American Legion. I think the last job he had, and no one else would take it. And John says, "Yeah, I'll take it." And I think he was a chaplain. I think that was his last job he had, and that was about a year before he passed away, I think. So, but thank you all again for coming. God bless.
All right, Len, John's son Len's going to come up and discuss some stuff about John.
I think I'm afraid to touch that. Okay, I won't touch it. I won't touch it. I'm Leonard. I'm John's youngest son, and when my dad retired, we retired to Sullivan County, and that's when in 1972, I believe it is, and then became the Sullivan County Sheriff, and got to live in the courthouse and got to know lots of people. So the fortunate thing is I'm getting ready to retire, and I get to come back to Sullivan County. So it's a great thing. John was my father, and when I talk to other people, since his passing, what I'm told is all these things that I never knew. The thing that how he helped other people. There's a number of people have approached me since his passing, talking about my dad and how he was a father to them. How he gave them direction in life, and how they, everything that they have, they really owe to John. I talked to some of my family and some of my cousins. They say, "Well, you are just so lucky that John is your dad. He is just the most wonderful, kind, gentle, and generous man." When they said gentle, I thought, my dad? I think there was two Johns. There was a John when he was in the Navy, and that was very strict discipline, that kind of thing. And then once he retired, he became the kinder and gentler, the warm and fuzzy kind of John. So. But when I look at all the things that he's done, he was, since the Navy, he was the county sheriff, was a post commander here a couple of times, I think. We talked about volunteerism. He ran duck derby a couple of times. He was always, at Geisinger. I thought it was interesting that, my mother was at Geisinger one time, and I was just, killing time, and I was looking at the bulletin board. And there was a picture of my dad there. I thought, when was this? But it was one of the many times he had been there, with children or for a number of different causes that he was at Geisinger. So I look at, I learned all kinds of things since his passing about, the accomplishments and what he meant to other people. But I look at Dad and I said, you know what? He was my dad. And that's the one thing I can say is he was my dad, and I'm very, very, very proud to be his son. I do definitely want to thank the guys at at USSVI, Don and Bill and Joe and those for initiating this process, because it's there's nobody I know that has a sign after a highway named after them. And and Representative Pickett, thank you very much for shepherding this through the process, and Representative Ernest, your office there, that you did all these things. But I think to me it's a great thing, and I just now I travel through Tivoli all the time, and so it's just something that I can just I look forward to seeing what this sign looks like and says. It's already a lot bigger than I expected it to be. So, but with that, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate everybody that came today, because John meant a lot to me, but he obviously meant a lot to a lot of other people too. So, thank you very much.
All right, John's son Ron is going to come up, and Ron is captain in the United States Navy.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming today, and I'd like to reiterate what my brother had said about those that made it this possible. I'm John's number 2 son, and he spent 30 years in the Navy, so I had to spend 31. And I would have loved to have been a submariner, and I mean, my son, who is over here, who used to be a Navy SEAL, he's medically retired Navy SEAL, and my brother John, who was my older brother. We were going through the book that my dad always had on the bookcase, which was Submarine Losses During World War II, 1949 edition, and he had all the submarines that were lost there. And it's a book that I found out just today, it was written by Nav Purse. It was a Nav Purse book, and it was kind of like required reading as a kid. And he had the names of those that he knew that had died on those submarines, kind of etched in ink. So it was kind of a personal thing to him. Every one of those submarines when you toll the bell. But he told me the story about the depth charging, and he told the story that Uncle Dan had about going into the Sea of Japan and going out of the Sea of Japan, and they went in a line abreast at 500 yards apart, quiet ship, and he talked about the mine cables running against the sides, and then there was a Japanese PC that passed between two of the ships, in the dark, and you're talking about submarines 500 yards apart and a ship going between them and being undetected, and it was just pretty amazing just to hear that story. Plus, I guess the thing he hated most was his depth charges, those goddamn depth charges. But he he graduated from high school, in May, and in June he was in the Navy, and then Pearl Harbor happened in December, and he'd already gone through submarine school and boot camp, and he was up in Maine where they built the Flying Fish, and he was part of the pre-com duty there when Pearl Harbor happened, and he said it was one of those things right after 9/11. He said everybody had a gun. He was a pure sentry. And they were shooting in the water, and dropping hand grenades in there because they just knew we were going to be attacked. And then they got the submarine underway as quickly as they could because, the Germans were kind of patrolling off the coast. And so the sea trials, and they made it through out to the Pacific where it was a little bit safe. You say safe, 9 more patrols later. And 7 years later, he left that submarine. 7 years on the same submarine. And back in those days, they had these pools, where you were kind of, when you went back to Pearl, you went to the Royal Haitian Hotel, which I took him there on a Dependence cruise one time when we did a Tiger cruise from Hawaii back. And he started telling me the stories of what happens at the Royal Hotel. And as in the Navy back in those days, everything was rationed, and but they gave you all the beer you wanted. But of course, if you can have beer, what do you want? You want whiskey. So this is a side of John that not everybody knew, but they tied their bed sheets together, and because you had to be in at 10 o'clock, and then they would tie their bed sheets together, and the barracks would be empty. Basically, because they'd be out in the town drinking whiskey because they could have all the beer they wanted for free inside the barracks. So it was kind of funny that he said getting out was easy, getting back was tough. You had to climb up the bed sheet. But so he made all those war patrols, and after the war, the V-12 program and all those sorts of things, and he always said, one of his failures in life is it took him 17 years to make chief, and 17 years because, that back in those years they didn't have promotions for several years because, you had all these World War II people and they just didn't have promotions. And he kind of told me how disheartening it was, and he finally made chief, but he really wanted to be a warrant officer. I mean, that's the only thing in the Navy he wanted to be was a warrant. But in 1957, when he, made chief, they did away with the warrant officer program for about 4 years so they could create the E8 and the E9 program. So he said, I'll become a goddamn officer. Yeah, because he was one of those guys that, thought, that, it's better to be a warrant officer or be a chief or, to be a senior enlisted guy. But he begrudgingly became an ensign, and of course, in those days, if you became an ensign you couldn't go back into the submarine service, so you had to go surface ships. And so he went to this World War II APA and, became one of the deck officers on there. And I got to do a couple Tiger cruises and Independence cruises. And I realized at that time in my life that this is what I really wanted to do. I mean, where you have great people working with you, there's respect for country, God, family, all those sorts of things. So I at that time, I decided I was going to join the Navy, go to college. I went to Penn State, did the ROTC program there, and became an officer. And then basically 31 years later, I called it quits. And then I got to know my dad, like my brother said, as the other part of my dad. Where he was here at the Legion doing just about every job that you ever had. And the duck derby, and he basically lived for community. When people talk about, country, God, community, I mean, that was him. I mean, he thought about community always, and family is the other part that, and he was known as Uncle Pete. In the Navy, he was Pete. And when he was out of the Navy to his family, he was Uncle Pete. And he was called a lot of other names by a lot of other people, but I knew him as Dad, and that was a real privilege for me. But I knew from the time that he got out, back in the yesteryear, he used to be able to get out of the Navy often, and then come back in, but you'd come back in one pay grade less. And I think he got out 3 different times. And one of the times we lived in a 50-foot trailer up at the farm, you know, and then we rejoined the Navy after that and went down, and I guess we went to Florida and some other places after that. But you know, to a lot of people he was called Junior. You know, to some people he was called Commander, because lieutenant commanders are often referred to as Commander. So he liked that. But I think the thing he liked most is as Dad and Uncle Pete. And it was my privilege to know him. I knew he loved Sullivan County. I knew my whole life that when he retired from the Navy, he was coming back here. I'm not sure my mother quite knew that for sure always, but I knew that. And you know, and he lived a good life. He did everything he wanted to do. And I mean, just, you know, when you walk around, you look at the people that he's touched, and both in the Navy and out and in the community. He was a great man, and I'm looking forward to seeing the sign and driving by it all these times, because he was quite a man, and I appreciate everybody taking this time to pay their respects and to name that highway after him. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ron. And at this time, Tina, if you want to come up, we're going to call for the unveiling. Charlie? Yeah, we're just going to call for it. So then, okay, you can. And then Dan, Len, Ron, if you guys want to come up to the sign. Sharon? Come on. You guys, oh, come on up. All right, if everybody could go back to their seats for a minute real quick. We're going to finish up. We have another song by Jeannie.
I'd just like to add that I also am very proud to be here today and helping to serve for this ceremony. I'm also a Peterman. My grandfather was Charles Peterman, and he was John's uncle, so his brother was John's father, John. And my mom was born a Peterman. But I've been asked to sing the Navy hymn, pretty much in closing, Eternal Father, Strong to Save. Just give me a second. Catch my small piano here. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm hath bound the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean deep its own appointed limits keep. Oh, hear us when we cry to Thee for those in peril on the sea. O Savior, whose almighty word the winds and waves submissive heard, who walked upon the foaming deep, and calm amid the rage did sleep. Oh, hear us when we cry to Thee for those in peril on the sea. O Holy Spirit, who did brood upon the waters dark and rude, and bid their angry tumult cease, and give for wild confusion peace. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee, for those in peril on the sea.
All right, thanks again, Jeannie. And for closing remarks, Jay, the commander from Legion Post here, is going to come up.
I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I thought it was a very nice ceremony. I want to thank Representative Pickett, county commissioners, and all the people who joined us. The Peterman family has graciously provided food, which was prepared by a very dedicated group of volunteers here at Post 601. And we were glad we were able to provide the facilities for you today. So, enjoy some light refreshments, and thank you all for coming out.